Welcome to Mount Zion United Methodist Church in Old Georgetown in the District of Columbia. Mount Zion is the oldest African American congregation in the nation's capital. Founded in 1816, the congregation had been members of the Montgomery Street Church, now Dumbarton United Methodist Church, which was founded in 1772. After experiencing years of discrimination and bigotry, the free and enslaved members decided to organize their own church, a few blocks from the old church. This congregation became more than just a house of worship. They worked to help free the enslaved who were in bondage. They also ensured that free and enslaved Black people had opportunities for an education. A Sabbath school was organized in 1823, and members of Mount Zion organized secular schools throughout the District of Columbia. Mount Zion also was one of the churches that decided that we were going to be fully involved within the abolition movement, as well as protesting the American Colonization Society's efforts to encourage free Black people to migrate from the United States to Africa. The church was very instrumental in serving as the foundation for the Georgetown community of free and enslaved Black people. By the 1840s, 20% of that population were members of Mount Zion United Methodist Church. The church was very successful, and by the time of the Civil War, our members served within the battle, and during Reconstruction, many Mount Zion members served in local politics, holding positions on the school board, as well as on the councils. Mount Zion outgrew the old church and started a capital campaign to build this structure that we're in now. Unfortunately, in 1880, before this structure was completed in 1884, our old church burned down. When the church was opened in 1884, Reconstruction had ended, and Jim Crow had become part of the lifestyle of Washington, D.C. Mount Zion opened the church up to social organizations to hold their meetings here, as well as political organizations. In 1879, Mount Zion leased the old Methodist burying ground in Georgetown to serve as the final resting place of its members. However, the church was unable to maintain this cemetery for all of the years that we've been able to have it. And therefore, many of the markers and tombstones went under a process of disrepair. These are two of the earliest markers that we have been able to maintain and keep to remind us of the souls that are buried in Mount Zion Cemetery. Around 1811, this cottage was built as a residence. It was built probably by an enslaved man, and it was used as rental property during the 19th century. Over time, both African Americans and white people lived in this building. Around 1920, it came up for sale, and Mount Zion purchased this as a community house to serve all of the young people who lived in this area. This area basically is known as Herring Hill, and it had a fairly large African American population. The community house housed a lending library, one of the earliest libraries in this area, because the public library in Georgetown didn't open until 1939. So it was used a lot. We also had our football teams, baseball teams. We had poetry competitions here. The young kids played out in the yard with all sorts of activities, and summer camp and Bible school was held during the summer. It remained active as a community house until about 1950, when the neighborhood's demographics changed and there were very few African Americans living in Georgetown. In the 1980s, this building was restored after years of disuse, and it became the Mount Zion Heritage Center. And in here we've got early 20th century photographs as well as some important documents. It is really the only English-style cottage remaining in the District of Columbia at this point. So it has historical significance not only from a social and religious standpoint, but also from an architectural standpoint. In 1897, the Mount Zion congregation decided they needed a parsonage for their ministers to reside. And they built this particular two-story house with a basement. And at the time, there were no other structures with the exception of the cottage next door. In 1920, shortly after Reverend Matthew Clare was named the second African-American bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church, a baby girl was born here. Her name was Leontine Turpo. That same year, there was an evening Sunday worship service. Bishop Matthew Clare came to baptize baby girl Leontine. During the baptism, he was said to have remarked, "Oh, I wish you had been born a boy, because then my mantle could fall upon you." Well, 64 years later, in 1984, Reverend Leontine T.C. Kelly was elected to the episcopacy of the United Methodist Church. Bishop Clare's wish did come true, even though it was a young woman.
Hi, my name is Reverend Selena Johnson, and I'm very proud and blessed to be serving as the pastor here at this great historic church and being able to carry on the legacy at Mount Zion. Mount Zion history is Black history. It's like a microcosm of all that African Americans have experienced throughout our journey in this nation. Time and time again, this church has been a witness to the goodness of God. This church has a testimony about the God of justice for the poor, the outcast, the oppressed, the left out, a testimony about a God who loves diversity and loves all, about a Jesus who not only saves our souls, but cares for our social justice as well, right here on earth. We continue to be working in the vineyard here. We have Georgetown Saturday suppers here where we give meals to those who are shelter challenged. We collaborate with other churches in Georgetown to do this every Saturday for 9 years. We invite you to the opportunity to come through a tour here on your pilgrimage, or to come to worship, to hear our relevant messages. Come and worship. You are welcome.